I'm going to record a video of this air filter and breather kit installation because I have yet to find a single video on YouTube illustrating this installation. And I had to go through a few things because I had missing parts, and also the directions I can see all over the internet. Some people, pretty much everybody, says they're a little confusing and lacking. So I'm going to go through a little bit of it with you. What I have here is an Arlen Ness Inverted air filter. And then, I don't know what you can see on here, this Arlen Ness, Arlen Ness instructions for that, for the air filter. And then in addition to that, I got this itemize discrete breather kit from DK. And what that does is, for those of you that are up on this stuff, the emissions on the Harley, normally the crankcase breather goes right into the air filter. And so you get that warm air, warm oily air going right into your air filter. If you use this discrete breather kit, and I'm going to show you here in a second how it works, but it's going to bypass that, and the hot air from the crank breather and the oily air will both be vented out elsewhere, and I'll show you where. So let's get started. Okay, part of what happens in this kit is a little confusing because I bought this from DK products. This is basically their breather system, this Arlen Ness air filter. And so it was my understanding when they sent it that they're parsing out the Arlen Ness parts, and giving you only the parts that are necessary, and then including their parts to kind of intercept the crankcase breather and then let it breathe out through their stuff. But in fact, it's not exactly what happened here, and it got a little confusing. So I'm going to show you what happened here. So however much you can see on the table, here's the Arlen Ness breather, the filter, the air filter, so you can kind of see what kind of filter it is. On the internet I see a couple different names, but basically it's their inverted air filter. Sometimes they call it a big sucker. And this is the backing plate for it right here. And this is the part that goes on the throttle body. And so what happens is if you're going to install that without the breather, then you would need these two parts right here. And then you see recesses for O-rings, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then this would go on the back of the backing plate. So effectively, if you didn't have the breather, you would have an O-ring here with a recess, another O-ring here with a recess. Then this flat part would mate here. And then this O-ring recess would go right to the engine block where it is right now, and it would mate just like that. But in this particular case, let's see here, and then you would, and this was something that was missing from my original kit, so I had to stop. I took my whole air filter off my throttle body, was all ready to install, and then notice I was missing these O-rings, and that was a whole nother discussion, and I'm not even going to bother getting into it. Somebody told me the O-rings are optional, and that didn't sound good to me at all. So instead of these little guys, what's going to happen is you're going to use these little spacers, and I'll show you why. But if you look at what happens is this backing plate mounts to the throttle body, and so this is the distance to the engine. So whatever you put on here has to make up that distance. So basically on the back you're going to have a spacer, and then you're going to have this, what they call a banjo bolt. And you can look inside, there's a hole, I don't know if you can see that, but it's going to vent out there. And so what's going to ultimately happen is these things are going to make up the bulk of what this would right here. A couple other things are going to go on there, and I'll show you. So one of the confusing things is it comes with two gaskets for the backing plate to the throttle body. They look to be actually a little bit different. I was told by DK they are in fact one and the same. They don't look the same to me. Clearly this side has a black, gray on both sides, and this one feels a little thicker. This one feels thinner and it is black on both sides. So I'm still unsure of what's supposed to happen there. Get to that. In the directions it talks about cover plates, but unfortunately here in the directions it doesn't give you any pictures of anything. So you're left to try to figure out what they're talking about. I had no idea what these things went to. What you're going to find is on the backing plate, fortunately there's these recesses here, and let's see if this one's the right or the left. This one's the right. So when you bolt these breather bolts through with this setup here, it's actually going to go through like so. And then these little cover plates will, if you can pick them up, will cover that up, and they'll go on like that and give you a nice, good looking finish. So that's the cover plates there. So what I wanted to tell you is the first things first is make sure you have everything in the kit. Now I know that seems ridiculous and you've been told that 1,000 times, but when you go through this stuff, I took all my stuff off. I don't know that I can't even remember the last time I got anything with parts missing, but basically O-rings are one of the first things you're going to come to, and I tore this thing apart. There are no O-rings in this kit. So in this thing you need the backing plate, which I've already showed you, and the cover plates, which I just showed you. These little doodahs right here, and they're marked. You may not be able to see it, but left, there's a little L right there and then an R on the other one, so they're marked, so that's good. It says you're going to need the inverted air filter. That's over here. I already showed you that. You need the outer cover assembly. This actually comes off. Hopefully it's you can see that from where you are. This outer thing comes off, and then you just have the filter there, and then what you'll do is when you go to install it, this thing has screw holes in it, so you'll line it up, and then here you look in the middle, it'll actually have the name, so you'll center that up as well. Let's see what we got there. Let's put that back on. The 6 O-rings. If you were installing this without the discrete breather system, you would be needing all 6 O-rings. If you're going to install it with the discrete breather system, you only need 4 O-rings. I have 6 here. It says 1 gasket. I've already talked to you about that. I have 2. They're slightly different, and one's a little thicker than the other. Not sure which one to use. I'll figure that out later. You get 5 of these smaller hex bolts right here. They're the ones that are going to go through and hold this one onto the backing plate, this outer cover to the backing plate. You have 3 other hex bolts. They're a little shorter and stubbier than these. They are actually threaded in my throttle body right now, just kind of sitting there waiting for me. 1 external breather system, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. 2 modified Banjo bolts. So these are the bolts. So what happens, you can see in the end there's a hole, and then the hole comes out and vents right there, and that'll all make sense to you as we get going here. That's going to vent into these Banjo bolts. And these, I guess these are the Banjo bolts. These are I call these the breather bolts. Let's see, what does it say? Does it even say? It's probably on the breather thing, but anyway, these are going to go through the Banjo bolts. So these are the Banjo bolts. Like I said, there's you probably can't see it there, the hole inside that vents through there, and it's this breather bolt that's going to go through it. And then we're going to have 2 powder coated spacers. So again, I don't know if they're talking about these or these, but either way, you're going to have both of them. You have what you need in this kit to install with or without the breather kit. So if I go to the breather kit, I'm going to need some sort of filter or catch can, because what's going to happen is that hot oily air is going to have to go somewhere, and you have 2 options. One, it can go to a filter where it'll just kind of, I guess it'll mist some very reduced rate out into the atmosphere, or you can have a catch can. One of my buddies, he has the catch can, and then he said he was going to go to the filter. The thought of having any kind of oil mist out on my bike just didn't sit well with me, so I opted for this catch can. The catch can has vent holes on the top, and it has baffles on the inside. Let's see if I can take this out. I'm trying to be real careful with it. It has a nice O-ring at the top. And from what I understand, this is a newer design for them. So this thing's kind of baffled up, and you can see the vent hole in the bottom. It came like this. So what's going to happen is the oil is going to come down here, and all this stuff will baffle in it. And at some point, you take this stuff off and clean it, and that's it. And you can see a little bit of stuff in the bottom, a little material there in the bottom. So just kind of be careful putting this back together. As a matter of fact, there's an O-ring. You know what, I'll set that aside. I'll get that in a minute, so I don't get stuck doing that right here. So that's the catch can. Then they're going to give you 6 feet of hose. This is their standard hose right here. Now, I opted for this braided hose, which was quite expensive, and in retrospect, I'm not sure I would have done that. About half of this installation is, if you mount it correctly, at least if you mount it the way I'm going to mount it, you're never going to see this hose. You're going to see about maybe 2 inches of this hose tops. So I'll figure out, I may mount the bulk of it with this and then just use a little bit of this and just, you know, eat what I spend on it. But for those of you doing this down the road, this was very expensive. I don't remember, I have to get the receipt out, but I mean, it was 30 or 40 bucks. It was kind of ridiculous. I thought, and I think it will look nicer, and it'll last long term, so maybe it'll be worth it, who knows. I guess while I'm on that subject, I bought these things additionally. Comes with these kinds of hose clamps. I can't stand these kinds of hose clamps. I know they do the job well, but I just can't stand it. They have a very 40s or 50s look to me. So DK sold these things. I couldn't really tell in the pictures what they were, but now that I have them, I can see what I'll be able to do is slide them up and hold the hose clamp part behind them, so that the black part is the only part that you'll be able to pretty much see. These two were very expensive, and I'm going to show you, I'll show you right now why I probably wouldn't do that again. I had a carburetor rebuild on one of my older cars, so for the hose clamps, again, I can't stand the hose clamps. So I bought these kinds of clamps where you just pinch it, and in this particular case, this one right here fits that braided hose just perfectly. It might not be quite big enough for the other hose, but you can go to the auto parts store and get whatever you want. I think that this is a much cleaner look. You pinch it, you put on spring steel, and you can probably, if I've got something, I can get it where it's kind of out of sight and mount it so that that's the part you see from the front of the bike, and that you don't see any of the hamburger meat, how the hamburger is made there in the back. But that's what I'm going to be doing on my bike for at least the parts that are sort of hidden. I don't really need anything aesthetically pleasant. So we got the 6 feet of hose, the customized breather bolts. That's these things we just talked about. We have the custom spacers. So okay, so now we know they're talking about these spacers here. You're going to have 5 zip ties. That was another thing missing from this kit, is the zip ties. I don't need them. I've got plenty of zip ties, but still they're missing. 1 black T connector and 1 brass T connector. Now they give you both these. I'm sure these are both in the video. I don't have anything where I can see exactly what you're looking at, so hopefully I got it here. These are supposedly one and the same, and you just use whichever one you want to use. Now I haven't figured out which one I'll use. I'm assuming the brass is more long-term, and I'm planning on mounting this where it's not going to be seen. Obviously the only part would be this little part right here, and in my application it'll mount. I'm going to try to mount this so it actually kind of goes up underneath like so. So there will be another hose coming out the bottom, and then unless you get up underneath the bike, if you're standing up, you're not going to be able to see it. If you get down on your knees or whatever, if I can't get it all the way up underneath here, I'm going to get it as close as I can. So I'll probably use the brass one just because it's more of a, in my opinion, a long-term application. I think of how much Harleys vibrate and the chance that this would have to crack. I think that I would rather go with the brass. We'll see how that goes. 4 shoulder washers. They give you these shoulder washers. They go on these bolts right here. And then what they're going to do is this thing has a smaller diameter, inside diameter, a larger inside diameter here on the bolt. The smaller one mounts right onto this shoulder, and it keeps it nice and steady. And if you try to put this side on, it won't steady it, it'll wobble around. So you'll know which side you got. And the mounting instructions for this right now, I'll go through that in a second. I'll put it all on there because that was another confusing part. Just going through the parts list right now. Hose clamps, which we already talked about. The Banjo fittings, which we already talked about. That's these. And the nylon washers. Nylon washers is a good one. There's supposed to be 6 of these. They're very, very thin. I couldn't quite figure this out, and part of the problem is if you put them on this bolt, you can see the inside diameter is not going to make it. I'm not sure what they're hoping to do with that. And but if you do put it on the shoulder bolts, it works better. It still doesn't index perfectly, but at least it indexes better. When I talked to DK, they basically said these plastic things are optional, and then they told me something else that concerned me a little bit, is that they're basically not impervious to heat. And in fact, once your bike heats up, they're going to sort of, they use the term melt. So I think what they meant is like they're going to form or something like that, and that they're not reusable, that if you ever had to take it apart again, those things would be wasted and you'd have to get other ones. They said one of the reasons they're so wafer thin is because they're trying not to adjust the depth. Like I said, everything's got to come to that width right there. And so they said, look, if I told them I'm going to get proper washers that index correctly on here, but then they started telling me, well, don't get things that are too thick because it'll end up being too big, too wide, be thicker than that. in total. And then when they told me they melted, I was like, that's not a road I want to go down. You know, I don't think that's what I'm wanting to do. They said those are optional. They said they ran them for some time without them, then they run them with them. They really never had any problem. Maybe I'm just being a little overly cautious. You know, this is breathing. I realize very low pressure, but still somewhat pressurized crank. The crank's pushing out air, breathing hot, oily air. And if you got a bike that spits a lot of oil, then there's a fair amount of oil coming out with that air. And in my opinion, they use O-rings front and rear on the backing plate. And the stock application and the Arlen Ness uses O-rings here. Everything's O-ring sealed. So I kind of question DK, why are they not too worried about the seal? And the answer is really, there is no answer. They're just not worried about it, and that's the end of that. They just say we do it and it doesn't leak. And if it did leak, it would take thousands of miles for it to leak, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. That's kind of the end of the parts list. We'll come back for the assembly. All right, we're going to go through this. I'll just take this off and we'll go through this together. So here's what's going to happen. This is basically the first part of the instruction is to install the modified breather bolt through the backing plate. So that's what I've done here. It goes through the backing plate. So I'm just going to set this down for ease. If you were using the nylon washers, then the next thing to go on to be the nylon washer. But if you can see through the camera, you see what my problem is. That thing would have no way of indexing on the O-ring. And quite frankly, I'm not sure I want to have something that's going to melt going onto the O-ring anyway. So I'm not going to use that. They claim it's optional anyway. And the first thing you're going to put on there if you don't use the nylon washer is going to be this shoulder washer. Now, the back of this shoulder washer is, you know, nice and smooth and a perfect seal with an O-ring. So I like that a whole lot better, and it indexes perfectly. So that's going to go right onto the O-ring. The next thing they want you to put on after that is the Banjo Fitting itself. So as I told you already, the small inside diameter indexes perfectly to that shoulder bolt, so it centers it up, going to keep it nice and tight. The next thing we're going to put on is another shoulder washer. Now, as I'm putting these shoulder washers on, I want you to know, or the Banjo Fitting for that matter, it doesn't tell you in the directions which way this stuff's supposed to go. So through trial and error, I didn't see why it would go with the lip down. But if you try it, it won't do anything for you, so it just can't go that way. It must go this way. It does not tell you in the directions which way. So the shoulder is toward the throttle body, toward the bike. And then, like I said, we take the smaller inside diameter, we'll put that on, and that indexes it right up. And we're going to take, and at this point, they want you to put another nylon washer on, but I'm not going to do that. And then after that, they want another shoulder washer like that. After that, they want to use this smaller spacer, which will index nicely on the shoulder bolt as well. And then they want you to mate metal to metal. This would go right onto the head with no seal whatsoever. These are the things that bothered me is, you know, you got a nylon washer in here, and it indexes not too bad, but it's going to melt, and I'm not exactly sure what kind of seal that I would hope to get out of that. So what I'm going to do for mine, take these off here. I'm fine with the O-rings and then the first shoulder bolt. Got no problem with that, shoulder washer rather, because you'll have grease, a little bit of grease on the O-rings. The O-rings will go on, that'll be fine. That will seal just perfectly. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go get some sort of you know, sealer at the automotive store, some sort of gasket seal or high temp, you know, sealant. And I'm just going to put a little bit, you know, just with a toothpick, I'll just put just a very, very skim coat of nothingness on there, and then I'll put this on. That'll seal. And I'm going to do the same thing with the back of this, or I'll do it on this surface here. I'll just put with a toothpick, I'll just sit here and put a little bit of Permatex, you know, some sort of, I'll try to get black so that it melts, you know, that's good with this. Just put a little on. You don't want it to, at least in my case, I don't want it to mushroom out and make a big mess. It's not going to really obstruct anything on the inside. If a little bit got on the inside, who cares? Just all it is just air going down in that catch can. And then we'll put this on like that, so that'll be a good seal there. Then I'll do the same thing here. I'll put a little bit of Permatex or whatever on there. That'll be a good seal there. And then I'll have a little, and matter of fact, on this I'll put a little bit of Permatex on both sides, so it'll seal there. And then when I attach this to the head, that'll have a nice good seal. So that may not be everybody's preferred method, but it's going to be mine. The reason is because when I take this apart, if this were to ever have to come apart again, first of all I would need is a little Permatex to put it back together again, and second of all, they seem to be very worried about using anything thicker than this extremely thin nylon washer. And if I'm just using a, you know, a little, whatever, I say toothpick, but I'll probably use a toothpick to put just a little bit of Permatex on there, just enough to make a good seal, and then I don't have to worry about it. It's fully sealed, so in, you know, 2,000 or 3,000 miles, I'm not going to start have oil dribbling out of these fittings, because this is just, I mean, this is just metal to metal right here. There's nothing on there. And if you use these aren't gaskets or anything like that. They're just nylon. You know, they probably seal better than metal to metal, but they're still not a good seal. So anyway, that's what I'm going to do. So again, the wash, this is going to be closest to the head on the motorcycle. And by the way, this is there's no direction for this. It just goes whichever way you want. You got the shoulder facing out to index this. You got the banjo bolt with the small diameter fitting going onto the shoulder that's on there, and of course the shoulder bolt. And again, I didn't bother putting the O-rings in, but you'll have an O-ring here, and you'll also have an O-ring on the outer side. There's actually 4 O-rings on the backing plate. You'll see the recesses. It's got a recess here and a recess on the other side, so when this goes through, this flat bolt will be O-ring fitted here, and then this shoulder washer will be O-ring fitted there. So that will definitely be all sealed up. And then you're going to put a little bit of Permatex on there, and that'll be sealed. Then you're going to have the other shoulder washer, put a little Permatex on the non-shouldered side, and it'll go on like so. Put Permatex on both sides of this. That side will seal onto the shoulder bolt, and that side will seal to the head, and you will be completely sealed. You won't have to worry about this anymore. All right, I wanted to add a couple of things here, just so you know. I'll mention them, sure, through the installation too. I'm getting a little long-winded here for what I wanted to mention. If you do decide to get this braided hose like I got, you know, once again, I like the braided hose. It's just expensive for what it is. It's going to come taped, and they're going to tell you in the directions, but you got to read the directions first. If you've never worked with this kind of stuff before, this outer braid will come apart, it'll fray. So what they've done is they've cut it and taped it. No doubt what happened here is as the hose went on, they probably had a piece of tape around, you know, this much of it, and then they cut it in the middle. And what you cut it with is kind of important too. You're not going to hack it with a knife or something like that. You're better off using like I don't know, garden cutters or some sort of, you know, big cutter type material, or a cutter tool or whatever. The other thing is, so in addition to that, so just be careful if you get this, wherever you cut it, you want to wrap it with, you know, hopefully masking tape or painter's tape or something like that that doesn't, not duct tape, nothing's going to leave a residue or pull all the stuff off, something that won't do that. So if you don't have painter's tape or masking tape and you get this braided stuff, you're going to need some. The other thing you're going to need is on these bolts right here. It is recommended. I don't, you know, it's not a must. But again, this is hot, oily air being pressed through here, so in time it would be my guess that it would bypass these threads. It's not under much pressure at all, don't get me wrong. You're not sealing something that's 30 psi or something. So what they suggest is you use some of this you know, Teflon tape. Just wrap it with Teflon tape. I'll either use this kind of tape or I'll get some of the liquid stuff, one or the other. Just a little something to make a seal on those breather bolts. And then the last thing is for all these other bolts, you are on a Harley, or at least this one's going on a Harley. So I have some thread locker already, but I got some fresh stuff just for this because I know that when I look down at the air cleaner in the engine, this stuff shakes pretty good. So you definitely want to make sure you have that. Other than that, so if you have if you have some masking tape or painter's tape, you're going to need some of this Teflon tape, and you're going to need some thread locker. And you should be set to go. The only reason you would need the masking tape is if you get the braided line. If you don't get the braided line, then you don't need the masking tape or painter's tape, but you will need the thread locker and you will need the Teflon tape for the breather kit. All right, I'm gonna go get a couple things and then we'll start this installation. All right, I thought I'd bring you in here for kind of a dry fit here. You didn't need to watch me go through all this, all the iterations here, but Here's the breather bolt, left side breather bolt, bolting into the head. And it's just, like I said, it's just loose. It's just dry fit right now, so I can cut all the line here. And then, of course, the other side's just loose on there too. And there's the catch can. So you get a feel for what's going on. These here on the heads are the breather, crankcase breather. So they blow out hot, oily air. And with the emissions, that used to go right back in the air filter. And as you can see, I haven't cleaned mine yet, but you know, I've wiped it out pretty good. And a lot of oily residue. So I'll get in there with some carb cleaner. Be careful not to nudge the butterfly valve or anything like that. And so the objective here was ended up being a little more difficult than I thought, because you want to be really careful that this doesn't chafe on anything, and it's almost impossible to keep it from chafing on this piece right here. And this is actually going to go in a little bit further. And then, of course, the second problem is you got to get the catch can high enough that it's not down here touching the crankcase either. So it's, you know, you just sit here, just be careful, and you probably can't see it, but I'm working with some painter's tape. So I wrap the ends before I have the before I cut, and then I cut. I actually use some of these gardening shears, and they work pretty good. I had these other ones down here. Tried these. I thought they would work better, and I couldn't get them to cut at all. So anyway, I'm sure you'll find something. These were the fittings I was telling you about that I bought from DK. And now I didn't bother using them here because you're not going to see these fittings. Those are the clamp fittings I was telling you about, rather than using hose clamps. These are these bend clamps, which worked real well. But the nice part is you can kind of see in here, you can hide the hose clamp. So there's the part that you screw down. I put them all behind there. Same up here if you look close. I don't know what you can see because I'm not looking at the monitor, so hopefully you can see it. But basically I put, so from the outside with the cover on, here's kind of the cover is going to be up like about so. So you're really not going to see much of this stuff anyway. Oops, I have it on backwards there. Sorry about that. But that's about where you're going to see it. So this stuff's pretty much hidden anyway, and you're definitely not going to see on the bottom here. But you do have to be able to service this. You have to be able to unscrew this off of here right here. So I want to make sure I can get to that, and I can. I'll be able to get to it. I don't want to be having to take off this backing plate again. That would not be pleasant. It's just because I would have to undo all the seals and everything, and I don't want to do that. I'm trying to do this one-time Charlie shot here. So that's it for today, and I'll come back. It's about all I can do. I flew an all-nighter last night, so and getting sleep today working with kids and other stuff, so I'm going to stop here today with the dry fit. Just trying to be careful with the hose so that I don't run out of hose. Again, down here, this frayed a little bit, but it doesn't matter because you're not going to see it. Nice and neat. Everywhere that you're going to see it a little bit, it's nice and neat, and it should look fine. All right, we'll come back. I just want to see this stuff. I just basically just you know, just a tape measure, and you know, marking on the tape with a felt pen, and just take your time and kind of get it right where you want it. I was trying to get this that was fairly centered up on the crank, so that it didn't end up way out here or didn't end up way back here. But again, what's going to happen when I tighten this down, this is actually going to be a little bit this way. And the reason is, you probably, I don't know if you can see it, but right in here, the hose clamp, I'm trying to keep it away from rubbing on anything. So it's going to be pulling just a little bit, which you can see should center that up real nicely. And fortunately on the forward one, there's really nothing to rub on. So not really too worried about that one. That's about it. All right, I wanted to go over one other thing that I came up with as I was taking this apart. I actually noticed it the most when I took it apart for you. On the oil can here, as I said, when you go to service it, you'll just unscrew it off of here, like so. And you'll have these baffles, which I'm trying to be real careful with. And there's a little foam in the bottom to, I assume, dampen or make sure it doesn't splash around some of the oil. But I also noticed on here, of course, it has an O-ring, which I'm going to see if I can get it out of there without tearing it, of course. And the O-ring is pretty dry. So again, trying to make sure that I don't have to take this thing apart over and over again.
There's a little something on there, not much. So I'm just going to take a little grease and we'll put it on there. And you know the rest of the drill after this is we'll just take that O-ring. I don't need to do it on the camera here, but I'll put that O-ring back where it belongs with a little bit of grease on there. It'll seal better than having nothing. And actually, now that I take it out, I see it wasn't completely dry, but it was drier than I would like it to be. There's no reason you can't, you know, slop up a little grease on here, considering what this is for. This is not an engine part that you have to worry about over-greasing or something like that. You definitely want a good seal, and obviously when the time comes to take it off, you don't want that O-ring sticking to anything either. All right. All right, I'm going to do a little experiment for you. As I told you in the beginning, the reason I'm doing this breather kit is because with the Harley emissions, normally out of here are the breather bolts. So this is where the crankcase breathes from, and it would normally go right into the throttle body, which is why you can see the throttle body has some residue. I've wiped it all down. Now I'm going to get after it with a little bit of carb cleaner here, carbon throttle body cleaner. What the little test that I'm going to do for you here is to see if that does any good. I mean, quite frankly, I'd rather just leave that alone. I'm not a big fan of shoving my hands and fingers inside the throttle body and accidentally whacking the butterfly and causing other problems for myself. And also, I've wiped off all I can, so it's not like it's going to ingest anything else. So it probably would be fine. But I'm just curious if it'll clean it up a little bit. Just to show you a little bit here, here's the old air cleaner. I had, I like the stock look, so I had the stock set up on there. Of course, you guys know the Velcro's on there, where that's how you get the old piece out. And here's the old air filter. It's pretty saturated with oil. This air filter is 1 year old, so that's you can see a little bit of oil there, residual on the bottom. There's the old breather bolts. Yeah, in fact, there you go. Here's how this piece went on, right, just like that. So and the stock look, but this is the Harley's stage 1 setup, and so these are the old breather bolts. It would breathe coming through there, and then it would go right into this backing plate here, and the backing plate would breathe right into the right here. This is where the oily hot air would come out, and you probably can't see it much in this video, but this is all, I never wiped this off, so this thing's just, the front of it's just set, it's got a light film of oil all over it. So obviously these two breathers right here will go, and that's where it'll vent into the catch can, just to give you a feel for what was and what will be moving forward. So I'm going to come back to you with this in a second here. I'm going to hit it with the chem tool, and the test here is to see if it's really worth your time, other than just wiping off the residual and going, or should you get after it with some carb cleaner or not. Alright, so there's after about, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes of pretty decent amount of elbow grease. That stuff's like carbon deposit. It won't come off easy. So spray and rub, spray and rub, spray and rub. I'm not going to stick a wire brush or anything in there at all. Not going down that road. And also, again, you want to be really careful with that butterfly valve in there, that you're not moving it around. So I think that's kind of the beginning and end of that. It's a little harder to, I don't know how much you can see of the top up here, it's a little harder to get to that, to apply pressure. And if you had your bike up on a jack or up on a stand, it'd be a little bit easier for you. But truth be told, I'm not exactly sure what this achieved, other than it's a little cleaner in there and it makes me feel a little bit better. If you look closely, you can see the castings anyway that are in the throttle body. So it's not like you suddenly took a surface that had become irregular because of those basically become almost carbon deposits, and made it nice and smooth so you had your good airflow back. It's irregular anyway. It's not exactly a smooth surface anyway, so it's cleaner, makes me feel better, but I'm not sure performance-wise that it accomplished anything. But there you have it. I'd recommend it. I mean, you never know what you're going to find. You might start wiping it off and there might be a big deposit, or even some foreign object that you want out of there. So I would definitely do it if you've got some carb cleaner around to do it with, to hit it with. I think some of the other people use brake cleaner too. I'm not going to pass judgment on that. Just whatever it is to get the stuff off. I just preferred using the carb throttle body cleaner. Alright, so it's not uncommon to take your bike apart, take something apart, tear the gasket up, buy a new gasket. That's pretty normal. But we're going to try here to, maybe if I ever had to take this apart, keep this being reusable, prevent a trip out to the Harley dealer or wherever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the gasket here, a little bit of red grease, or you can use any grease you want, and we'll just grease it up on both sides, just a little bit of grease on both sides, get it to seal real good. But in the event that we ever have to take it off, maybe it'll survive it. There's no guarantee. Just hope that it would survive and it would save us a trip to the dealer. So that's it. As you can see, we're not gooping it on. This is something you're going to want to be a little critical about. There's the backing plate, and I'll put it on the backing plate, and then we're going to loosely put it in place. You don't want to over snot that because it does have to seal. We're just putting some grease on it to assist it seal and hopefully get it to survive if I have to take it back apart again. Alright, I didn't think you need to watch me do it, but you give the O-rings a pretty good lube there. It does two things. One, the most important part for the installation, it'll keep them in place. So don't be bashful. You can lay it on a little bit thick there. It's all right. Just keep them in place. And then the second thing is, of course, it's good preservative for the O-rings. It'll make them last a little bit longer. And I'm using this red tacky grease. It's not normally something I'd use for other applications, but for the install it works pretty good. All right, so let's go ahead and lay this up loosely on here, and I'll be right back with you. All right, so now you can see we're laid up loosely. You know, leave it nice and loose. So I put the gasket in there, you can see, and I didn't put any thread lock on here yet because they're not permanently fastened. I don't know if I'm gonna have to take one or two, back them off more, take them out, whatever. Because now we have to lay everything up in between here, and we're going to start using that gasket seal. And remember, we'll start out by threading the breather bolt through there, and then we'll have to feed it through bits at a time as we get each piece in place. And I'll be able to fold this a little bit out of the way, give myself a little extra room, feed that through, and then I'll snug it. And then of course we'll move over here to the other side, do the same thing, and that should be about the end of it for the backing plate installation and the breather installation. And for anybody that's interested, this is a 3/16 right here for these three Allens, 3/16 hex. All right, I'll be back with you when we move on with the installation here. Okay, we're going to review the layup one last time before we put it all together, just so we have it down. So we're going to start with this breather bolt. The breather bolt will go through the backing plate. We already have the backing plate loosely mounted to the motorcycle. So after we go through the backing plate, which will have an O-ring seal here, and it'll have an O-ring ready for the other side, we'll take the shoulder washer and we'll mount it with the shoulder out toward the bike. You can see the shoulder there. The next thing that's going to happen is we're going to mount the banjo bolt, which is already part of this assembly. And anywhere there's metal to metal, we're going to be using this black Permatex right here, which is designed for maximum oil resistance gasket maker. That's what it is, which is exactly the application we're looking for. So we'll put some on here or on the washer one way or another, so that'll have Permatex to it. We'll have Permatex again here, either on the back of this shoulder washer, same thing. Shoulder will again go out towards the motorcycle. Permatex on both sides of this, put it on, everything's indexed. And when we mate to the motorcycle head right here, this also will have the Permatex on it. So that's what it's going to look like. This here, where this big gap is where the backing plate is, and it's O-ringed on both sides. Okay, I wanted to remind you too, I've got these three laying out where they're going to go. We've talked about this black Permatex. Again, maximum oil resistance gasket maker, exactly what we're looking for. The Loctite is going to go on any bolts that go in here, and which would be the 3 that go on the throttle body, and the 5 they're going to ultimately hold the backing, the cover on the air cleaner. We'll talk about that later. and then this high temperature thread sealant. You can either use the Teflon tape or you can use this. I think it'd be easier for me to use this during this application. So that's what's going to happen. This stuff here will go right on these threads, on the breather bolt threads. So you just need a little dab for two of those bolts. That's the only place it's going to be used. And we'll talk about the rest of it as we go here. Okay, this Permatex is pretty messy, so I'm just going to show you the last piece that I'm laying up and what I'm doing here. So I'm just taking the Permatex and I'm just smearing it around. Oops. Well, get it on camera and all of a sudden get a little carried away with it, didn't I? And it's probably laying it on a little bit thicker than I've been laying it on. Again, it's not clean the inside out there, but I'm not overly worried about the inside. There's plenty of, it's coming in through the breather hole, and this is all supposed to seal anyway. So this Permatex is just kind of, you guys know, it's nasty stuff to work with. I don't need to get it all over my camera and everything else. But I just wanted to give you a little taste, so I'll put that, I'll mount it up, and then I'll show you what it looks like. All right, here we go. We're still kind of in a laid up session here. I'll show you why in a minute. But we got the breather bolts all set up in here again. And actually the Permatex helps setting it up, because as you slide the stuff on, the Permatex is tacky and it stays in place. So it actually worked very well for putting it together. Otherwise, as you slide stuff in there, it's gonna, you know, want to come dangling out, falling out, but it didn't. It's the light coat of the Permatex. And then, as I told you earlier on in this, I pulled this a little bit so that the hose clamp that you can barely see will not touch anything on the throttle body. So that's been accomplished. I hope. I can't really see in there, but I can feel with my finger that it's not touching anything. And we got the same thing on this side. There really were no obstructions to worry about on this side, so that's fine. So now what I'm going to do, and I say we're still in the layup, is because I'm going to take the throttle bodies out just one at a time. So I have this one loose, and I'm going to put some Loctite on it, and then I'll reinsert them. By the way, these were 1/4 inch hex. 1/4 inch hex, and these are again 3/16 hex. So they're kind of the tools you'll need for this job. Alright, here we are with the backing plate all the way fully installed. I took these out one at a time. They were loose anyway to install the backing plate. Put on a little blue Loctite, torqued them down, and as you're going to see elsewhere all over the internet, be careful how much you torque these. There's a torque spec to them. And then same with these going into the heads. You find your torque spec for your bike. I tightened them what I'm comfortable with. I've done enough work on motorcycles. I'm pretty comfortable with what I'm torquing to here. So these have been with the blue Loctite. They have been little dab blue Loctite. These on the other hand have the this high temp Permatex thread sealant, and that'll keep them from leaking, whoops, on the inside. And that's about it for that. So the next thing here we're going to be doing is putting the air cleaner on. Hard parts over. As you can see, we're fairly well centered up with the catch can. The catch can is low enough, I mean, in a personal, you can't see any part of the T at all. I mean, even if you're looking in here, you can't see it. The only part you can see right here, actually this slides, so I'm going to slide it like that, and that blocks out the hose clamp, and I really can't see from this side, so I'll have to come at it later, but I think this one's fairly hidden anyway. So that's, in my opinion, a pretty clean installation for the backing plate. By the way, I don't think I ever mentioned earlier on, you'll see back here that I don't have anything. I think this is like for the ignition stuff. The Harley normally comes stock with a piece that supports these two clips right here. When I had the Stage 1 kit put on at Harley when I bought the bike, they took that piece off. In this particular kit, you don't need that. So if you have it, you're going to need to take it off. It can't be there. In order to take that off, it's recommended that you take your seat off and that you at least loosen your tank and prop it up a little bit, because to get to the two bolts underneath, yeah, you can actually see them right here. There's the bolt holes right there. In order to get at those, you got to have this tank up a little bit out of the way. All right, let's get after it and finish this install. We'll get the air cleaner on here and get it all lined up. All right, so real quick before I put this up, because once I lay it up it'll be a little hard to describe, but you have, I think, 5 holes in these. They look symmetrical to me and they lap up nicely. I noticed on some of these inverted ones they'll be equal, and then on each side they have a real wide opening. This one doesn't have that. It's all very symmetrical. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the air cleaner and we're going to line up where it says Arlen Ness so that it's straight up and down when we see it. Now, I know you're probably, as you watch this video, think, man, this guy's obsessive about everything. I don't think that I am. Just watching other videos, watch how other people do things, and then just my own wrenching over the years. But this is pretty common. Even back in our old 1970s race days, this was pretty standard fare. But you want to make sure that the air cleaner seals. So it's obviously going to have a sealing surface in here, right here, and it's going to have a sealing surface on the backing plate of the motorcycle right here. So you want to take, you know, some more of your trusty grease here, just a little bit, and you're going to give it a nice sealant right here on both sides. The other side that's going to match with the outer cup. And this is, you know, it's going to serve a couple purposes, but the main purpose is that it seals the air and won't let any air sneak by there. Now this is, I'm sure, a very high quality rubber seal that's on here, and will do the job fine. But again, this is pretty standard fare for air cleaner stuff, is you want to get a little grease on there and it keeps it all sealed up. All right, I'll do that on both sides here. Let's see here, we'll start on this side. Same thing here, right where it says Arlen Ness on here. We'll get it on mainly on the lips where it's going to make contact here. This part here is kind of the recess. Not much going to happen there. And you don't need to get too carried away with this. More than a skim coat, but not sloppy. You don't need to be sloppy about it at all. That's, again, I'm just kind of mainly looking for the raised lips where it's going to make contact. And that's about it for that. All right, so remember we talked about these black covers that go over these pieces here. I've already got that one on. They look like they would stick in place pretty easy, but what I did and what I'm about to do to this one, I'll show you. Back to the grease again, right? All else fails. So just take it, just a little smidge there on 2 sides, and we'll just put it right up here in place. It has a nice recess that it goes in. Put it in the recess, grease will hold it in place, and then we'll put the rest of it on here. All right, so the air cleaner's on now, but we're loosely installed here. So you can see I got it as close as I could, but it's loosely installed on here. So we can move it around a little bit like so, get it real perfect, just the way we want it. Probably as good as I can see from here, close enough. And then what I did with the 5 bolts that are on here, they're just loosely in place. So rather than taking the whole thing off, I'll take them out one by one, put a little bit of Loctite, and then torque them down. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. All right, here's the finished installation. I think I got it pretty well centered up on the Arlen Ness inside there. Got the cans pretty well centered up. Doesn't matter, you really can't see it being black and all. Very hidden. They sell a chrome one or a polished aluminum or some other one too. I suppose that one would look pretty good. I just figured, since this is meant to capture oil and you may get a little oil drizzle on it from time to time, if it's black you're never going to see it. If it's chrome and it burps anything out the vent holes on the top, then you're going to be down here wiping it off or whatever. Probably give you some warning it's time to change the can or clean the can out. But anyway, so how did we do here? Well, here's this is nice where this is the covers that cover up the heads of those nuts. I'll tell you that these two both these bolts on this side where these covers were give you, I wouldn't say fits, but they give you a little something to play with for a second here, because they are, I think these go through these, thread through these. It's a little hard to see what you're putting them through, so you just got to be careful and get it just right. By the way, these are 5/32. That's the size of these. So what we had, I don't even remember anymore. We had 1/4 for these, 5/32 for these little ones, and then I think it was 3/16 for the throttle body hex. So once these are tightened down, you're going to have a good seal on the inside of the air cleaner here, and then the air cleaner will be forced onto the backing plate. I can't move it now. It's on there nice and steady. So it's I know that it's on correctly. It didn't smush it anywhere. I don't see any deformities, so it fit just perfect. Everything's good. So the Permatex you're supposed to let set for a while before you fire up the bike, you know, put any kind of pressure or anything to it. The bike's in the garage now, so I'm not going to worry about it. It's New Year's Day, and we got company coming in a while, so the bike will have to wait anyway. But you know, with the installation and the stuff they had, they kind of told me this, that, and the other thing, a couple different explanations. I ended up doing it my way, and I'm hoping that this will serve me good for a long time. You know, really don't want to be having to take the backing plate back off again if it's avoidable. Again, very easy access to the oil catch can. It just threads out of itself, and it's down low enough that I'll be able to get the baffles out if I need to. I'm kind of thinking what I'll probably do is pull the catch can off, go clean it somewhere else, probably put some rags right here and just spray those baffles with some carb cleaner, and that should probably be enough to clean them out. But I guess the first time I have to clean it, I'll figure all that out. But there you go, the Arlen Ness Inverted air filter, and I believe maybe the first ever video for this DK breather kit. This one's called the Premium Discrete Breather kit. So here's the crank breather. It's going to come through here, the oily hot air, and it's going to come down here, and the hot air will dispense through the vents on the top where the oil will be captured. And the baffles, I understand this is a newer style, the baffles will capture the oil and keep it in there. The big benefit to this, you know, I already had the stage 1 air cleaner. This one looks a little bit bigger. My understanding is this one's kind of water resistant too. You don't need to use a sock on it, so that's kind of cool. But the big benefit here is that power wise is that you no longer have hot oily air dumping into the air cleaner. Instead, the hot oily air comes down here, and you just strictly have air coming in. So two things are going to happen. One, you're going to keep the oil out and keep your filter from getting saturated. And the second thing is you're going to breathe cooler air, and everybody knows what that does. So you don't have the hot crankcase air dumping right into your throttle body intake. That's not good. All right, hope you enjoyed the video. All right, we just took first ride today. Get a good look at it. So looking at here, after I fired it up, I checked for leaks. There's no leaks anywhere here. This is just a little bit of Permatex around there. It'll come right off. I didn't want to smear it around while it was wet. It'd be a lot easier to take off while it's dry. You can actually see it in there. It formed nice tight gasket seals in there. It's perfect. And then we'll come over to this side. You see the same thing. Nice tight gasket seals in there. And you can't, I'm in here directly in front of it, which you can't see by the eye. From up here, as you can see, you really can't see anything. No oil leaks. And again, the crankcase is not like it's pushing a lot of pressure, but it does push a little bit of oil, a little bit of air. Of course, we come all the way down here, and again, I'm way down underneath now, which you can't see from up here. No oil, no spitting. Now this is the first day. I'm sure in time, because it's venting here, that I'll see something, but it's easy enough to get to. At the same time, if you look from out here, it's all hidden. You know, you really can't see the top of it. And I'm looking from down here. If you're standing up, this is what you see if you're standing up looking at the bike. You really can barely even see the can. It's not until you kind of get down at floorboard level that you can really see anything, and you really have to get up to see the top of the can. So I'm pretty pleased with that install. So the other thing I would add about this is when I inquired before I bought this about how wide it was, they told me at DK that it did not stick out any further than stock, and if it did, it was negligible. I will tell you that now that I've installed this and I got on it, and it was immediately noticeable. It definitely sticks out further. I didn't take any measurements before I took the stock one off, but when you put your foot down the floorboard here, the inside of my knee comes right up and touches this. Now, I will tell you that my floorboards actually have the extension kit on there, so they're probably out a good 1.5 inches or inch to 1.5 inches from what a stock one is, so that's even with my floorboards out.
Having said all that, and it bothered me in the beginning, right as I first put my legs up, because as I coming to find when I first put my legs up, I tend to center my feet up right here on the pad, and that's when it was touching. But in my normal driving, I tend to have my feet up a little further and out. I tend to actually put my feet out a little sideways here for comfort zone if they're not up on the highway pegs. So today, when I first put my feet up on the pegs, you feel it, but as I start riding, I notice that the placement of my feet, it doesn't bother me at all. Another thing, when we stopped at my buddy's house to kind of look at it, I was surprised at how hot all this was out here. I mean, the backing plate I knew obviously would be very warm, but I didn't realize it'd be so hot out here. Didn't bother me on my leg. Obviously, I wear long pants. I'm a person that suits up, so I've got all my safety gear on. I don't run around with shorts and no helmet. So anyway, I'm all suited up, so it didn't bother me at all as far as the heat. When we got off to talk about it, and I touched it, and I was like, man, that's pretty warm. But in any event, that's about it for that, for the size and for the installation.